Welcome to The Church Planter's Life, a podcast exploring the possibilities and pain of starting a missional incarnational church. This podcast is a resource of the V3 movement. V3 is a grassroots training organization for men and women planters around the country. Thanks for tuning in as our host Matt Alexander leads the conversation.
Matt Alexander down in Miami, Florida, and we're hanging out today with Mr. Aaron Monts up in Seattle, and it's pretty cold in Seattle today, huh?
That it is. Snow day number 2 in a row for all of our kids.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how 1 being low, 10 being very high, how likely are you to punch one of your kids today?
Thankfully, I only have one, and she's pretty good right now. So we'll see if she comes into the room while we're talking. That'll determine it.
All right. Well, yeah, no worries. But yeah, snow days. I don't really know what snow days are like in Miami, but it sounds terrible. Sounds like
they're pretty rare here. So yeah, and it's a snow day because of the ice on the roads. We can't get up and down the hill. People are literally skiing down Queen Anne Hill right now, which is our neighborhood. Yeah, I posted a video of it to my Facebook page just earlier today.
Yeah, that sounds like a really fun thing to do.
And crazy.
You should get out there. You should get out there and show them what you got.
No thanks, I got nothing.
Cool. This podcast is we're calling it The Planter's Life, and it's just a conversation with people who are planting missional, incarnational expressions of the church in their neighborhoods, in their places, in seeking to be the people of God in North America in this time. And each of these is going to be around 30-ish minutes long, and is just conversations with people who are doing the hard grassroots level work of church planting. So Aaron's up in Seattle. And tell us a little bit about Seattle. Tell us a little bit about maybe the city as a whole and some of the contextual dynamics of the city, but also about your particular place and neighborhood and the context in which you guys are planting. And yeah, just describe that for us. Paint a picture for us a bit about that.
Yeah, Seattle's a really fascinating city. Probably a lot of people know it as a church planting hub, thanks to Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll. Like, it was kind of the center of church life for a while. Acts 29 network was pretty big here, but the reality of it all is that the church never really had a heyday here. It's been a very desolate place in terms of church for quite a while. And so it's a really fascinating spiritual landscape we have the most agnostic, atheistic people who hold those beliefs in a major metro area in the country. And so that certainly colors some things as well from a spiritual plane. From a city like dynamic, and how some of that plays out is we're actually, despite being a liberal bastion of a city, we were the 3rd lowest percentage of voters for Trump in the country. Detroit was the lowest, then it was DC, which is funny and ironic, and then Seattle. So we are the 3rd lowest percentage of voters for the current president of any major city. And so despite that, Seattle is still really fascinating. We're a segregated city racially. So we're divided north-south. So the north side of the city, north of downtown, is predominantly white, and the south end of the city is predominantly African American, Filipino, Asian. It's a very, very fascinating divide between the two, and there's a long history of that with redlining within the city as well. So we're still racially segregated, even though we have one of the most racially diverse zip codes in the country. I think it might actually be the most racially diverse zip code in the country, down in Rainier Valley, which is on the south end of the city.
Yeah.
So we're a fascinating mix because of that. We've experienced a pretty big boom in population we've been consistently one of the fastest growing cities in the country, thanks to Amazon. Google's moved in. Expedia is about to build a huge campus in our neighborhood. Facebook is now in town. And so they're all building and developing these huge campuses, and Amazon is really leading the way in that. And so we've gone from, I think, about 16, 17 years ago, the city was about 500,000 people, and now we're over 730,000 people. That's the kind of growth that we've experienced. We're now in the top 20 in population in the country, which is pretty big for Seattle, and we're dealing with all of the growing pains of that as well. So it's been a pretty fascinating ride in terms of how we look as a city and all of those things. And at the same time, we've got a pretty big disparity between the haves and the have-nots. We have the third largest homeless population in the country, not percentage wise, but number of bodies that are homeless. It's New York, LA, Seattle. So we've got all this great wealth within the city, people that have moved in and are making a ton of money, and a lot of people that have nothing and that are living on the streets. And so a day like today, where it's really cold outside, there's not enough beds, there's not enough shelters to house everybody. And so there's a pretty large concern about what to do with those, our most vulnerable citizens. Yeah. So.
And what about the neighborhood, the section of Seattle that you guys are in, and I'm assuming you're planting also kind of in that context too, that your neighborhood? Yeah. Tell us about that.
We live in the Queen Anne neighborhood, which is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city, and it's the highest hill in the city. So Seattle has 7 different hills, and Queen Anne is the largest of those hills, which is why people ski down it during the winter, during snow days.
Yeah.
And so it's a predominantly white neighborhood because it's on the north side of the city. We're just north of downtown. We're considered to be a part of the urban core, but we are just north of downtown, and it's kind of this really fascinating bubble of people that live here. But it's predominantly white, and it's predominantly made up of activists and lawyers and doctors. We're pretty wealthy in terms of our neighborhood and what it looks like. And yet at the same time, there's a large vulnerable population within our neighborhood as well. There's a tent city, which is basically a tiny house village that is in our neighborhood. And there's 3 different shelters that have opened up at the bottom of the hill, which is where my wife and I and my daughter live. We live in that kind of area. We're also really close to the Gates Foundation is a block and a half. Their headquarters is a block and a half from our apartment. The Space Needle is right there, also a block and a half away. And then also Expedia is opening up in our neighborhood. We're also 5 or 6 blocks away from Google's new headquarters that they're building. And we are just a stone's throw away from Amazonia, is how the residents call the Amazon campus, which is just a ton of different buildings all throughout the city. So it's a really fascinating place to live and be and try and work within the city as well.
Yeah. So highly urban, highly, very wealthy, lots of new business, new opportunities, new technology coming in, while also at the same time, right in the middle of it is this tent city too. Yeah. It's just kind of this these really bizarre worlds that are colliding in a pretty consolidated, pretty, dense space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how does that, what kind of ground does that create culturally, relationally, spiritually, emotionally for planting kind of a missional, incarnational expression of the church in the neighborhood? What is that? I guess maybe, how does your the approach to being the church in your place intersect with the other influences that are affecting the neighborhood?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We've got people in our community that work at Facebook, that work at Amazon, and so being able to converse with them about the realities of tech life and the tech world are really fascinating, as they get to shed light into the way in which that functions in the world around us. And so we get to see that, but then at the same time, they're also wanting to create solutions that are for some of the issues and the problems that we face as a city. And honestly, one of the easiest things to do is from a church engagement perspective is to work with the homeless population, to work with it's just easy. It's visible, it's present. You don't have to have eyes to see it, really, because it's just always there. It's always present. There's not a day go by that when I'm walking around or even just sitting in my apartment that I don't hear homeless people that are mentally challenged or have mental health issues screaming and yelling, laying out on the sidewalk. When I walk to my gym every day, I see a couple different of the same people just laying along the street, wrapped up in blankets or whatnot. And so you don't have to have eyes to see it. It's just very present. And so the question then becomes, what do we do about that? How do we engage in that way? And the tent city has been the easiest way for us to participate. We got involved with thanks to Facebook, we got involved in a neighborhood community group. It's just a group of concerned citizens. And again, Seattle's pretty activist culture. Yeah. And so a group of concerned citizens that said, hey, we want to provide dinner every single week for the residents of Tent City 5. And we said, hey, can I participate in that? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And I said, hey, I've got some friends that would love to do this as well. And I said, oh, bring them along. And over the course of, I don't know, 3 to 4 months, our community was making up the bulk of the volunteers. And what's really fascinating about that is the leader of that group said, hey, would you like to lead this thing now? It's like, well, just so you know, like, we're a church, if that's okay with you. And they're like, we don't care. You love these people well, you're taking care of them, you're doing some great things, you're bringing people along that we'd never thought we would ever see or want to participate in something like this. And it was like, well, okay, yeah, sure, but will you still be a part of the group, and will you help by inviting other people within the neighborhood to be a part of this as well? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. Wow. And so it became this really beautiful collaborative work between the neighborhood and our community. And while our community makes up the bulk of it, we're probably a 60-40 split, as we see people every week within the neighborhood participate in this. And the residents within the tent city, there's 60 residents at the moment, and it's about to expand to 80. And we make dinner for them every single week. It's a home cooked meal. So we have this Google spreadsheet sort of thing, Google Doc, that different weeks, and we've got a menu set out, and people sign up for it, and everybody has access to it, and everybody can kind of jump in or bail or whatnot, and as they need. And we make these home cooked meals at home, and we all show up at 6:30 at the exact same time, and then we serve them food. And it's really funny because recently one of the guys, his name is Joseph, and he's kind of the unofficial mayor. He's probably the longest resident there. He's been there for 16 months. And the goal of the tent city is they work with a nonprofit to get people housed. And they housed 50 of the 60 people last year that came through there. Wow. But Joseph is disabled and has some pretty significant health challenges. And so finding low income housing for him has been a challenge. And so he's kind of become the unofficial mayor. And the past couple of weeks when we show up, Joseph yells out, "The church is here, the church is here." And it's seriously one of like the coolest things you could ever imagine. Like, you walk into this place where people are struggling, where they're struggling to eat, struggling to make ends meet. Even though some of them have jobs, they're just trying to get into housing. And you hear him yell, "The church is here, the church is here." It's seriously one of the coolest things that I've ever experienced in that respect. And every week he tells us there's several groups and organizations that come through that bring them meals, but he tells us consistently, you guys are the only group that make a home cooked meal for us. Everybody else buys food. And not only that, they buy food and they drop it off and they leave. You guys are the only group that comes through and actually serves us. And you make us feel valued. You make us feel loved. You make us feel wanted. And so that's a huge thing for us. And so we've kind of located within our neighborhood in that respect. And every week we show up, we get to hear the church is here. The church is here. It's a good reminder.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love some of the aspects of the story that I think are really compelling are that, you know, it seems like you guys initially, you know, connected with something that was already happening in the area, didn't try to reinvent the wheel or try to find try to, you know, start something that maybe you assumed was an issue, but it wasn't necessarily clear yet. Like you kind of connected with something that was already going on, really invested in it, and you know, have gained more relational credibility through kind of faithful presence in that space. And this is really beautiful, really compelling. Well, tell us a little bit about maybe some of the background, how you and your family sensed a call to plant in this place and kind of in this way, like in this more missional, incarnational way of, as you know, there's a million and one different ways to plant a church, and lots of different trainings and books and resources and stuff to influence how we choose to kind of go about planting and leading in our context today. So what was it for you that kind of spurred you to plant in a more of a missional, incarnational expression of the church? And how did you guys end up in this place? And just some of the backstory would be cool to hear.
Yeah, so this is the second church that we've planted. The first one was in San Francisco in 2008, and we were also in the urban core of San Francisco, and it was a beautiful space. We talked about how the location of our Sunday gatherings was in between great wealth and great poverty. We met in the San Francisco Chronicle building, where the newspaper was. We met on their ground floor, and right across the street from us was the San Francisco Mint. Like it no longer existed or functioned that way. It was more of a museum, but this symbol of great wealth was right there. And Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, lived in Mint Plaza.
Wow.
And other very wealthy people lived in that general area. But then when you look to the left, it was Skid Row. It was the most impoverished people within the city. It was kind of, it wasn't young poverty, it was young poverty. So we found ourselves in that kind of space. And how we got there, how we got to San Francisco was kind of just holy discontent. It wasn't an anger at the church. It was more of just a discontent at what we saw happening in the ministries that I'd been a part of previously, that the church wasn't doing enough to actually engage the community and the culture around us, that it was more about a come and see, which I think has really valid cultural significance. I don't hate that. I don't think it's a bad thing. It was very healthy, the things that we had been a part of, but it was very much come and see. Like, if you build it, they will come. And it worked. Sure. It was very attractional in its approach. And I found a lot of really good value and benefit in that, but also really frustrated that we weren't doing anything outside. I didn't find the counterbalance to it. And so wanted to do something that was a balance to that attractional model. And I had talked about it for a long time. And I remember my friend Jeff, I was talking to him on the phone, and he said, Aaron, it's time for you to do something about this, or shut up, just shut up or do something, because I'm tired of talking to you about it. And I was like, oh, okay. And he said, he quite literally said, I'm not going to talk to you about this anymore unless you do something. Then we can talk about it more. I was like,
yeah.
So that was kind of the impetus to kind of do something, and kind of started to put the feelers out and try and figure out what it looked like to start something new. I had no clue what it was like, and ended up hooking up with a couple of different organizations that kind of helped us in our first endeavor and our first experience with planting. And it was different. It was difficult. It was hard. And we did some really beautiful incarnational things, but I still was doing a lot of the attractional side of it as well. We were really trying to find the balance, and we would succeed and we would fail. We would succeed and we would fail. And it's just a real big tension point. When we decided to plant again, it was, hey, we should really lean more into the missional incarnational approach. And let that be the driver. I think the first time it was about trying to find the balance, like that we could be in a quote unquote and church, both missional and attractional church. We can do both at the same time, and it would be really easy. I don't disagree. I just think it's really hard to start something that way. I think it's probably easier to course correct along the way. Yeah. So we wanted to, and I think it's easier to course correct towards attractional than it is to course correct towards missional. You win people to, what you win people with is what you win people to. And so let's let the impetus be that missional incarnational approach, and let's do it that way. And then we'll backfill attractional stuff as we go, if we need to, right? And see what works, see what happens. Let's use every tool under the sun to try and figure this thing out. I'm a pragmatist at heart, so it was let's just be practical about things as we go.
Sure. So how did you guys end up in Seattle, and in this particular neighborhood in Seattle? How did that happen?
Yeah, when we decided to plant again, we knew that it had to be somewhere along the West Coast. And I'm not a Southern California person. More power to them. I'm just not a Southern California person. The culture rubs me a little, a little wrong, I guess. Also, like, this is unpopular, I'm sure, but I'm also not a big fan of Portland. So, we knew it had to be an urban environment. And so that kind of left us with Seattle or Vancouver, BC. And I really love Vancouver. I think it's a beautiful city. I'm enamored with the culture there and the people and everything about it. But it was going to be really difficult for us to make that work, mainly because part of our strategy is my wife is a career person. In fact, she's out of town right now traveling for work, because that's a part of how we fund what we do. And it was going to be really hard for us to do both in Canada, to immigrate and to do those sorts of things career-wise for both of us. And so Seattle kind of became that landing point. And we spent some time doing a discernment process. We gathered about 20 people around us to pray for us and to speak life into us and to help us figure out what it was about Seattle that would work and what wouldn't work, and specifically about our personalities and our culture that we're bringing, right? The church culture that we're bringing with us into any space. Because the reality is, you bring with you your own past, your own baggage, your own struggles, and your own ideals. And so we went through that discernment process, and we were affirmed in multiple venues and multiple spaces. We went through an assessment process as well after that, was also affirmed through that. So we felt pretty comfortable and confident that this is where God was sending us. It was probably about a year plus process of trying to figure out whether Seattle was the right place for us. We came out here for a visit. This is where we actually honeymooned way back in the day. So my wife and I have been married for coming up on 17 years here, and we actually honeymooned here. So it's kind of funny. We look at some of the old pictures of the city that we have, and we're like, oh my goodness, it has changed so much. It's fascinating.
Very cool. Yeah. So maybe talk to us, break down a little bit. Feel free to do a little storytelling around if you want, but just really simply give us some of the brass tacks of what are some of the rhythms of the plant right now, the community right now. You have the weekly, one of them you've already talked about, the weekly meal, sharing a meal with the folks at Tent City. what are some of the other rhythms that you guys have communally that you involve others in? And then what are just some of the real basic rhythms that you have in your life that help you to live on mission in your place, stay connected with the people in the neighborhood, relationships? What does it look like for you to live as a missionary in your neighborhood, just in real basic ways right now in the season? So I guess two parts to that question. What are your kind of your communal rhythms? What are your personal individual rhythms right now?
Yeah, those are good. Those are really good. Our communal rhythm is we have a Sunday gathering, a Sunday worship gathering that we meet in an old church building that we rent out for super cheap. It's way below market value. I mean, it's unbelievable how
awesome.
that door has opened for us. And so that's pretty cool. So we do a normal, regular Sunday gathering, but that was not our initial thrust or drive. That has been something that evolved out of everything else that we were doing. But that started back in April. So we're less than a year old in terms of our Sunday gathering, right? But our community is about 3 years old. And we started with doing just regular dinners. We would just meet every Thursday night for dinner and hang out, pray together, talk, get to know one another relationally. Seattle's a pretty isolated city. It's very introverted.
Yeah.
It's very dark and gloomy, especially in the winter. But it's just a very isolated, insular sort of place where relationships, loneliness is probably our biggest challenge as a culture. Probably one of the darkest parts of our culture. And so we wanted to break that down with dinners. We would spend time together in that respect. And that's what actually evolved into our Thursday night Tent City dinner. We evolved that dinner that we were doing for ourselves into serving others. And that came out of a conversation of like, hey, maybe we should think about engaging our community. What would that look like? And so those are just the early simple questions that we asked, and it kind of naturally evolved. But there was that first impetus, that first push into that question of like, hey, you guys want to do something? Yeah. What is there to do? And so I took the ownership of that and just started looking all over the place to figure that out. And so that turned into that. We have normal small groups that meet that are just traditional Bible studies, that are traditional brunches. People get together over meals a lot within our community. But then we also have a discipleship huddle that is a group of 5 that get together every single week to really dive deep into life together, into discipleship together. And we're planning on multiplying out of that here within the next, 3 months, I think. So it'll be about 1.5 years of us meeting together regularly, going through a specific curriculum, which we've just been walking through, creating a discipling culture. I think that's the name of the book.
It's one of 3DM's resources.
Yeah. And so that's been super helpful to just have something that kind of grounds us and pushes us forward.
Yeah, cool.
And we'll multiply out of that. But then we also do missional communities. So we call them neighborhood communities. The idea is that we'll multiply those throughout different neighborhoods within the city. And like we just had one on Sunday that was the Super Bowl, right? So we had a Super Bowl missional community, bringing people from all walks of life together. And so that's kind of the normal rhythm and rule of our community. In terms of gathering space.
Yeah, great.
Personally, I do a lot in terms of probably too much in terms of trying to get to know and serve within our community. So I'm a baseball coach for Little League. So I do junior high boys baseball. There's no junior high boys baseball teams with the schools here in Seattle. It's all community based. You either pay to play in terms of like city leagues sort of stuff, or you play Little League. And so I've been coaching our Little League team for the past 4 years. And this will be my 4th season coming up here at the end of this month. And Little League starts in February here, by the way. It's kind of interesting. February through June.
Okay, cool.
June.
Nice.
It's super early, right? And
yeah.
And so I meet parents through that. I just saw one of my kids' parents at the gym the other day, and she was like, "Oh, Gavin is so excited to play again. In fact, he recruited 7 of his friends this year." I was like, that's why we have 2 teams this year in our neighborhood, right? It's because Gavin recruited almost an entire baseball team on his own. right?
Wow.
You're
Yeah.
like, this is really cool. I'm on the board of Toastmasters for our neighborhood. So there's a local neighborhood Toastmasters group, which I think is perhaps one of the greatest things to do for any pastor, missionary person. We were all trained in public speaking, right? At some point, like if you went to Bible college or seminary, you were trained in public speaking. And I got involved with it because I wasn't preaching anywhere regularly, and I still wanted to work on the craft, right? So I'm like, hey, how can I work on this craft? Oh, Toastmasters, right? So
Sure.
I started attending and was a part of it, and have been a part of it for the past year and a half, almost 2 years now. And it's been an unbelievable experience. I get to share the gospel every time I speak in a very subversive sort of way, right? Like, I'm not preaching from the Bible, but it's really taught me a lot about how to preach to others without using scripture, but utilizing the truths of scripture, utilizing the truths of the gospel. And that's been a really fascinating journey. I'm known as a pastor among the people there, and some of them actually would consider me to be their pastor. I've pastored them through the death of family members, through the death of a dog, which is also really fascinating. And there's just that sort of stuff is really cool, and the conversations that you get to have as a result of that are really fascinating. I'm a part of the Chamber of Commerce in our neighborhood, so I go to gatherings all the time. So those sorts of things are pretty regular. But I think the most minute rhythm that I try and hold on to is thanks to Mike Frost. He talks about the 3x3, like have lunch or a meal or something with 3 people every single week that are a part of your community or that might be Christians, and 3 with people that are not. So I work to schedule that really regularly, and it's actually really hard. It is a hard thing to do, working out schedules with people to make that stuff happen. But I have found it to be one of the more rewarding rhythms that I've been able to be a part of. So
let's double click on that. What makes it rewarding to you? Why is that important for you, you think?
The relationships that are developed throughout that rhythm. Some of the people within the city that have become some of my better friends have been because of that. And they may not be Christians, they may not care about the church in any way, shape, or form, but we get to talk about that stuff. There's something about knowing that I'm a pastor, that they know that there's, and the way in which I present myself is like, nothing's off limits. We can talk about anything. I don't really care. We can talk about football or sports, which is a big deal in this city, or we can talk about life, whatever you want to talk about. I just had coffee with one of those guys last week, and we were talking about heaven and hell and theology and his approach to scripture, which he's just not quite sure he knows what to think about scripture, but his approach to it, it's been super fascinating. We talk about Jesus and how Jesus has influenced my life, how Jesus has potentially influenced his life, and he didn't even know about it. It's just been super fascinating conversation. So those conversations are all a result of just doing that stuff regularly. I had a conversation with another guy a month ago who we invited over to our house for Thanksgiving. I'd only met him once, and he's from China. And so one of the great things, I learned this from a campus ministry guy a few years ago. He said, hey, if you've got people that you know in your sphere that are international people, the best thing that you can do is invite them over to your house for holidays, because they want to experience American culture. They want to know what it's about. And it's a great way to get to know them. And so I invited this guy over. His name's Winway. We invited him over to our house for Thanksgiving, and he brought his wife, and they spent Thanksgiving with us. And it was really awesome. So we had like 20 people in our tiny little apartment, and it was just overflowing, and it was like elbow to elbow at the table. It was beautiful. But then got together a couple of weeks later to talk, and he was like, hey, I'm really curious about this Christianity stuff. I'm Buddhist, but I don't really know a whole lot about Buddhism, but I'm really curious how Christianity and Buddhism kind of interplay with one another. And I felt a little out of my element, because honestly, I don't know a whole lot about Buddhism. It's not anything that I have spent a lot of time studying or trying to figure out, but it's still really easy to have those conversations about Jesus, to circle a conversation back around Jesus. But that was his impetus. And all because I said, hey, you want to grab coffee? And it was beautiful and great. So I mean, they're just really fun, fascinating conversations, just by being present with people, inviting them into your life, letting them sit around a table with you and your friends and your family. It's pretty neat.
I love it. So you've been in this neighborhood in Seattle for 3 years, or a little over 3 years. Talked kind of planting in this more missional, incarnational way, adding on maybe some other elements as you go, but having that kind of be the primary thrust of the ethos of the community. We're going to kind of pivot and kind of wind up our time together, but if you were to speak a word of encouragement to encourage someone who has a heart for their neighborhood, or for maybe a pocket, a network of people in their context, but are having a difficult time kind of figuring out what it could look like to enter into that neighborhood or that network of people, to begin to cultivate relationships and kind of start a more missional expression of the church in that place. How would you encourage them? Maybe a piece of wisdom that's been helpful for you in kind of moving into that type of more missionary type of posture. How would you encourage, empower, support someone has a heart for it, but is struggling to kind of get going with it?
Keep showing up. Just keep showing up. It's the simplest and most frustrating thing. The thing that we've seen in this neighborhood, that I've seen, that my wife has seen, again, Seattle's really insular and really isolated, and it's hard to break in relationally with people here. And so we just kept showing up places. Even when I thought like we were getting nowhere, I just kept showing up. I felt like I was banging my head against the wall with people. I just kept showing up. And through that, people started to talk to you, started to make conversations with you. I've been a member of my gym for over a year now. And it's seriously one of the most frustrating things. I talk to somebody every single week and without fail, and it's just met with like a wall, right? And just like, oh my goodness, like I'm just being friendly, I'm just being kind, and it's not even like it's not even like a brush off. It's just like they look at you like you're an alien from another planet. Like, why are you talking to me? Yeah. Right? It's super strange. But it's been a year of this, and within the past month, something flipped, something switched. I don't know what it is, but all of a sudden, those people that I've been talking to for a year that looked at me like I was an alien, all of a sudden they started talking to me. They became the instigators of that conversation. And I was like, this is new. This is strange. Okay. Hey, it's nice to meet you, Becky. Like it's really fascinating, but all because I showed up regularly. I'm a regular presence at the same time, the same place, the same people. And that has been a very important and valuable thing. The same is true of bars. I have 2 different bartenders that I have gotten to know fairly well because I go to the same bar, same day, same time, every single week. Same with coffee shops. Go to the same coffee shop every single day, every single time, like pretty regularly. I'm pretty structured in that respect because I want to be known, right? Yeah. In those spaces. So you want to be a face in the neighborhood. And Seattle's big, right? 730,000 people, but you look at my neighborhood, there's probably only 20, 30,000 people in our neighborhood. I think that's right. 24,000 people in our neighborhood. And that's like a small town. So if you spend your days and your times and your hours in that place, you can be known pretty well. You got to look at it sometimes from a little bit of a microcosm as opposed to a larger entity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, think about it in terms of a particular place, kind of a parish kind of perspective more so.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah,
just keep showing up.
that's great. Yeah, that's a great word. If we wanted to keep up with you and the church, what you guys are up to, how would we do that? What is it? A website, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So you can find our church online at unitedchurch.love. So that's kind of our website, but that's also our Instagram and our Facebook. So you can unitedchurch.love. You can find us all there. I blog infrequently, but I write. So aaronmonts.com. And then you can Aaron Monts at Twitter as well. And I think it's the same for Facebook. Yeah. Look me up. I'll friend you.
Cool.
I'll hang out with you.
We hope you discovered something meaningful in this podcast for your church planting journey. To connect with our training, tribe, and tools, go to thev3movement.org.